Around the world, people are waking up. They know we need change, and not just at the edges. We need to change our systems, not just our straws. But the question remains, how does change happen? In the face of these mounting crises, it can feel hopeless, but it shouldn't. Because there is a blueprint for change, buried deep in nature. It's a story of transformation, encoded at the deepest level of being, the imaginal cell. A cell that contains within it a vision of something new, of something better. The caterpillar, while alive, consumes. But this cannot go on forever. Everything has an end. Everything has a tipping point. All that is left is decay. But from this place of darkness, something new can be born. At first, the caterpillar fights this new presence,
What we want is more learning in schools and less activism.
seeing it as a threat, clinging to its old form. But the imaginal cells persist in spite of this. They begin to emit a common frequency. They cluster, they form collectives, until eventually they reach a critical mass. They can no longer be opposed. In time, the old yields to the new, and something beautiful emerges. So know this, the future is not foreclosed. Alternative worlds are possible. A world where hope matters more than despair. A world where care matters more than profit. A world where solidarity matters more than self-interest. Change can happen, and change is coming. Are you in?
Converging Paths. Converging Paths.
Good day to you all at the Converging Paths Podcast / now videocast. We are streaming live currently on Sunday nights at convergingpaths.org, and good to have you on. I see some friends from Arizona days, my Connecticut days, and Florida and so forth. It's good to have you joining us with this the videocast live tonight. And we've got a very interesting subject. We are continuing with our exploration of these 7 churches that had letters written to them in the book of Revelation. Rather unusual book to be having a letter to your church written in, but we'll be looking at a particular tiny town in Smyrna, which is in modern-day Turkey. But before we get to that, though, I really would like to kind of preface this whole thing tonight with a little bit on where I see the state of Christianity right now. When I look at the overall picture, I see throughout history, the last 2,000 years, has been Christianity 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and the 1.0 phase being that early church, the time that we're actually going to be looking at pretty closely tonight, in that first few centuries when Rome was in control and Christians were, pretty beset upon and persecuted, and that was really this kind of imaginal cell phase where, just like the video said, when the caterpillar starts to cocoon and all the insides start melting down, you get these cells that arise, and at first the original cells attack the imaginal cells. The imaginal cells contain the DNA of the butterfly it's going to become, but at first they're attacked and as foreign entities, and they begin gradually to cluster together. And when they finally cluster enough, then they become this unstoppable force, and the butterfly is going to happen no matter what. Christianity then entered in the 4th century of our era, Christianity 2.0, which was the age of the empire, when Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the empire. And a couple things happened. One, with the Christianity that then it became safe to practice Christianity, and the Christians who kind of became what we know now as the Celts from Ireland and northern and England and northern France and those areas really carried on one form of tradition, which I think actually was very closely related to this heady, beautiful time in the first few centuries of Christianity. But you mix that with the Christianity of the empire, and you mix this very strong political interests using then religion to kind of justify empire, and that doesn't go well. It doesn't go well for Christianity or the empire, and it didn't go well for the Celtic Christians. They existed and flowered for several centuries until the Roman Catholic Church really shut down kind of that movement, which didn't reappear then until the last couple centuries again. But now we've moved, and throughout most of Christian history, we've been in Christianity 2.0, which I'd call Christianity of the empire. And even when it hasn't been politically expressed as empire, Christianity has still been in that empire phase theologically, where people say, Christianity is the only way. It's the one true faith. All others are illegitimate. People are going to hell, or at least are not connecting with God. Didn't Jesus say, "I'm the way, the truth, and life. No one comes unto the Father except through me"? And they interpret that to mean it's Jesus's way or the hell way. But there is another way of understanding what Jesus was saying there, which is actually emerging in what I call Christianity 3.0, which only started happening in the last century or so, when you start getting modern transportation. People are actually visiting other countries, and now you have modern communication systems. And pretty soon, over the last century, you didn't have to be a guru sitting up on a hill meditating anymore to kind of discern that, you know what? These other faiths seem to be pretty connected to the divine as well. And maybe Jesus is actually talking about a way of life that connects us to the divine, not simply one particular religion. And so that is the faith that I see emerging in our era, that's kind of in this new imaginal phase, cell phase, where it's still considered to be foreign to the dominant caterpillar of Christianity 2.0, but it is growing and starting to gradually clump together as we find each other. Those people who say, "Hey, I fully embrace the path of Jesus, but I'm not denying the legitimacy of the other paths that God seems to be creating for humanity." In fact, maybe they're even got Buddhist friends and Hindu friends, and maybe they're married to a Jewish person or a Muslim person or something like that, and they're actually seeing that we're all kind of like children of the same parent, and if we stop fighting with each other and trying to decide who's the apple of the parent's eye, and actually start comparing notes, we actually learn that each child relates to the parent in a particular way, and it's the same parent but different. Every child has a different personality, so when we compare how we relate to one another, we actually learn more about the parent, and also we learn more about ourselves and how we can interact with that parent. And so it's a very interesting phase, and it's also one that's kicking up more and more dust. And in our series, what we're going to be doing tonight is looking at these 7 imaginal cells. During the series, these 7 kind of imaginal cell churches that existed in what is now modern-day Turkey. Last week, we looked at the Ephesus, and this week, a little community in a town called Smyrna. And you're going to see that these people were under attack, had some definite struggles, but also some amazing insight comes for how we deal in our day with emerging from the cocoon phase into the butterfly phase. I do want to acknowledge that the Converging Paths podcast is sponsored by the Eden Tree Foundation, which employs present and emerging technologies for spiritual exploration and growth, while fostering interfaith understanding, empathy, and community. We're also sponsored by Darkwood Brew at darkwoodbrew.org, and they have a message, some exciting news to share with you before we go further.
Finally, some real news that's cause for celebration. At Darkwood Brew, we're offering 10% off our entire library of progressive small group video resources. Access over 30 series featuring more than 120 frontline thinkers, artists, authors, and theologians with the message of hope in the face of despair. All episodes include leaders' guides and questions to inspire free-range conversations. Sign up today, save 10%, and be ready to download deliciously transformational Bible study materials in minutes. Join the revolution and save some scratch. Darkwood Brew, cage-free Christianity for the resistance.
Yeah, Darkwood Brew actually contains the world's largest collection of small group resources created specifically for the Christian pluralist community. So check them out, darkwoodbrew.org. And also, lastly, I want to note that this particular series is also sponsored by Pasagrille Beach Community Church in beautiful St. Pete Beach, Florida, probably one of the top 10 or 20 beaches in the country. And what a great congregation worships every Sunday there at Pasagrille Beach Community Church, a United Church of Christ congregation at 8:30 and 10 o'clock every Sunday morning. And they are going through this series in worship. And, well, guess who's preaching it? Yeah. So let's get into tonight's central topic, which is this church in Smyrna, the letter to the church in Smyrna. And I want to just preface this in case you weren't with us last week, that these letters are written by a guy named John, who is probably a bishop of the early church in the area, and he's in jail. And he's writing these letters to his congregations, and he's really, what he's talking about is he's predicting the fall of Rome eventually at God's hand, but in a very different way than people would imagine. I mean, Christians never raised arms against Rome; they would actually convert. But regardless, Romans don't like to hear about them going into the Dust Bowl of history. And so he's got to, and they would perceive any fall of Rome to be a violent one, given their own violent nature. So in order to get these letters out of the prison cell to his churches, they've got to pass through the guards who are going to read surely every single one of his letters and to see if it's okay to send them out. And he's not going to do anything to overtly talk about what he's really talking about. His community would get it, but he's writing in code. So we sit here at year 2024, we think, oh, he's writing about things, the end times that would occur, that seem to be occurring in our day or whatever. No, he was writing about his own day, but he just happens to be writing on a deep enough level that there are actually certain dynamics that have occurred throughout history. Actually, they've always been relevant in the particular day that people are looking at them. And so if you know the kind of the code language and the history, you discover a lot more than what's on the surface of the book of Revelation. So let's take a look at this particular letter. We read, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna," and this is, according to John, actually the voice of the message directly from the living Christ, okay, writing these letters, dictating these letters. "To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say they are Jews, but are not, and are of the synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Beware, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, so that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have affliction. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let everyone who has an ear to listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death." A lot of code language in that, but we first want to just ask: was John anti-Semitic, or Jesus, if he's truly replicating Jesus's words? I mean, did you hear that line, that one particular line that would be fairly offensive, but you'd think, I know the slander on the part of those who say that they are Jews, but are of the synagogue of Satan. Wow. Well, as we're going to find over and over again in Revelation, things on the surface are different from what is really being said. And if you know the code, you know the history, things look a lot different. And no, John was definitely not anti-Semitic, nor the Christ he's represented. So that just to give you a little spoiler alert. But there is some significance to this statement. We're going to look at this directly. But just some background about Smyrna. Smyrna is actually modern-day Izmir in Turkey. So you're not going to find Smyrna on a modern map. It's Izmir on the western coast. It's about 35 miles north of Ephesus, where we were last week, and it's kind of along this kind of upside down U that follows the Roman postal route, and the 7 churches lie around on these seven on the postal route there. And Smyrna had been a very prosperous city and famous city. Was founded in 1200 BCE. It goes way back there. And you know that program, The Simpsons? A central character was inspired by somebody in Smyrna, that being Homer. Homer, like the Greek Homer, came from Ephesus. From Smyrna. He was born there in the 8th century BCE. Actually, a lot of famous people you come from Smyrna, and so very prosperous city, prominent city. In fact, it was really the second largest city in the entire kind of that region of Asia Minor, second only to Ephesus, where we were last week. Ephesus having about 250 to 300,000 people, and Smyrna having about 200,000. But the Smyrnans like to think of themselves, maybe Ephesus had the quantity of people, but they had the quality of life. Kind of like maybe that rivalry that takes place between Los Angeles and San Francisco. With San Francisco's thinking, well, we're smaller, but we're higher quality of life. That's kind of was the feeling in Smyrna. And they were very prosperous. They were called by the Romans the glory of Asia. And that's because the Romans and the Smyrnans had this very tight relationship with each other. They're all googly eyes over one another for about 300 years before John wrote his letter. The Romans loved the people of Smyrna, and they had definite reasons why. If we back it up to 195 BCE, the Romans were the power on the rise. They were not the dominant force in the Middle East, and they were fighting against the Carthaginian Empire, which was centered in Carthage, and they weren't doing so well. And in fact, at a particular battle in a place called Cannae, they were taken by surprise by this guy who was leading this pack of elephants over the Alps, and then into this area, and swooped down upon them and just decimated the Roman army. That guy being Hannibal, the famous Hannibal with these pack of elephants. So once the Romans were defeated there and things had already been going badly for them, a lot of the Roman allies actually switched sides and started fighting for Carthage instead of Rome. And they saw what was coming, and surely Rome was going out, so they thought that just to save their own skin, they would support Carthage. Well, everybody did that except Smyrna. Smyrna doubled down on their support of Rome. They sent them support, and they also, to make it very overt who they were supporting, they built this magnificent temple to the goddess Roma in Smyrna. And so, of course, rumors of Rome's death were greatly exaggerated. Rome actually got the upper hand, and they never forgot Smyrna for their critical support. They showered Smyrna with gift after gift, and building programs and all kinds of support. And later on, though, Smyrna kind of went into an era of decline, and again, Rome remembered though Smyrna's critical support. So they actually, Rome basically bailed out Smyrna and again, put a lot more money, a lot more building projects into Smyrna. So it regained its title as the glory of Asia. And a lot of the dignitaries in Rome would vacation there in Smyrna. And because of that decline that was then being brought back to life, they gained the title of being the city that was dead but came back to life. Now that may sound familiar to somebody. Who else was dead but came back to life? Oh, yeah, the writer of this letter, who is reminding you, the living Christ, who reminds the Smyrnans, the church, I'm the one who was dead and came back to life. And if you hang with me, you will not be affected by the second death. So in other words, he's saying, I can give you much better. I am giving you much better than Rome's giving you there. So it's a direct allusion to the history of the time. Now, Rome would also, later be challenged once again, only by powers closer to Smyrna, by this region in what is now modern-day Turkey, kind of to the east of Smyrna, called Pontus, and a guy named Mithridates the sixth decided to push the Romans out of the entire area, push them out into the sea, and a lot of the other city-states then joined the Pontus crowd. And in doing that, once again, Smyrna held firm for Rome, and that great danger to themselves, because now these are all their close city friends and so forth, are joining sides against Rome, but Smyrna stays with Rome. And as a result, at one point the Roman army was actually, they got word that they were freezing in the battlefield, and so it is said that the citizens of Smyrna literally stripped themselves of their own clothes and sent them to the Roman army for support. And once again, Rome was very grateful. In fact, Cicero himself called Smyrna the most faithful of all our allies. And so when it came time for Rome to then bless one of the cities with a temple to the Emperor Tiberius, which would have brought a lot of cultural value to the city, tourist value, religious value, and also a lot of money and political value, they were decided to, let's build this in Smyrna. They turned down other cities that might have that were vying, like Ephesus and Sardis. They built this magnificent temple to the Emperor Tiberius, and also they built this kind of acropolis on the top of the hill that looked like a crown, the crown of the city. And of course, there's a mention of a crown in the letter, and mentioning that hang with me and you will have the crown of life. Again, I'm giving you better than the Romans can give you. But as a result of that temple to Tiberius, and all, you can imagine the citizens of Smyrna were like fiercely patriotic then, and so they really took the emperor worship very, very seriously. And of course, throughout the Roman Empire, the Romans required everybody who was a citizen to make a yearly sacrifice to the emperor as a god, and you'd have to have that sacrifice certified. You'd get a certificate of the sacrifice every year. It's like your citizenship papers. Or if you want to do buying and selling, you were a merchant, you'd have to have your papers to assure that you were a legitimate citizen and could make transactions legally there. And if you didn't make a sacrifice to the emperor, well, you were an undocumented person for sure, treated like one, and oftentimes much worse. The people in Smyrna really kind of doubled, tripled down in their vengeance against those who did not support the Roman emperor. They really saw them as being fierce, terribly unpatriotic, and Christians were accused of being atheists because they didn't believe in any God except for one, and so forth. They really had a hard time, and consequently, some of the most famous martyrs of the early Christian era come from Smyrna, like a guy named Polycarp. Polycarp being a bishop of Smyrna in the later 2nd century, who he was threatened with being burned alive at the stake by the Romans if he didn't make the sacrifice to the emperor. And he is said to have replied, 86 years I have served Christ. He has done me no wrong. How then can I blaspheme the king who saved me? Well, that did it. They put him up on the stake and they set the fire. And it is said that as the fires licked his skin, he did not cry out, but rather offered prayers of thanksgiving to his God. That's life in Smyrna for a Christian in that first into the 2nd century. Pretty tough. Now, curiously, Smyrna was also a very multicultural city, and so a lot of people from all over lived there, including there was a very a substantial and thriving Jewish population. Once the Romans had conquered Jerusalem in 70 A.D. CE and destroyed the temple and everything, a lot of the Jews then left Jerusalem. They're part of the diaspora, and a lot of them came to Smyrna because it was a prosperous city. It was a nice kind of vacation town as well. So it's economically robust and a beautiful place to live. It's a really beautiful city if you've been there. And so they were thriving in Smyrna. Now, you might ask yourself, why would the Jews be thriving when they themselves didn't believe in making a sacrifice? I mean, they only worshipped Yahweh. They always resisted the Romans, to make sacrifices. They wouldn't do it. So why did one group who would refuse to make sacrifice thrive, where this other group who refused to make sacrifice were really on the run for their lives and economically destitute. Well, it's because the Romans discovered early on the hard way and repeatedly that if you require the Jews to worship anybody but Yahweh, they revolt. And that's what caused that big conflagration in 70 CE that resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem, was a revolt because the Jews would have nothing of treating the emperor as a god. And so the Jews became the only group in the entire Roman Empire who received a pass. They did not have to make the yearly sacrifice. And so they could thrive even though everybody else had to do it. Now, I can already guess that some of you are scratching your heads because weren't the Christians of the first century, they considered themselves to be Jews. Those early Christians did not think they were starting a new religion. They simply considered themselves to be Jewish. In fact, they were Jewish, those earliest Christians. They were simply Jews who followed Jesus as the Messiah of their faith. So they didn't see they were starting a new religion. They were simply fulfilling and carrying on the very religion they were already practicing. So those earliest Christians were Jews. In fact, Gentiles were not allowed to be Jesus-following Jews unless they converted to Judaism and were circumcised. And in fact, the greatest debate in the entire early church of that first century was whether to allow Gentiles in. And if so, did they still need to be circumcised? Did they need to follow Mosaic law and eating kosher and all these things? It was a big deal dispute that took years to really work out because the Christians considered they were simply Jews. They were Jews who followed the Messiah. And so you can imagine, based on this understanding, that the Christians were rather perplexed because over time, over that first century, the Jewish people, the traditional Jews who did not believe in Jesus, were increasingly insisting that, hey, these Jesus followers are not true Jewish people. And in fact, they called them Christians. And so the more that label kind of stuck, obviously. And so the more that they were distinguished from one another, suddenly now you do have this. If you're an outsider, you're not seeing one religion and a sect within the religion. You're seeing these two different religions, and part of that religion is saying, yes, they're not part of us. They are a separate deal. And so the Romans had to decide, do we extend the exclusion to these Christians, or is it only Jews? Well, you can imagine what the Romans decided. The Christians were just a minor sect within Judaism, if they were part of Judaism at all, in their opinion. And this minor sect, they don't have political power. They don't have military power. They seem to be completely uninterested in violent overthrow of the Romans and so forth. And so, no, they don't get an exclusion. They've got to pony up the sacrifice every year. So this is what created, great problems. And you can imagine how those Christians felt about the Jews in Smyrna who were continuing to maintain that they're not us. They don't qualify for the exclusion because they're not us, when they could have just kind of taken them in and said, hey, they're just a sect within us and so forth. And so, if you were a Christian in Smyrna, you had basically three choices if you wanted to remain alive or put food on the table. One is you could renounce your faith in Jesus and join a synagogue, or you could do what you consider to be blasphemy against Jesus and make the yearly sacrifice to the emperor, or you could do what most of them did, which was go underground. They worshipped in secret. They didn't have their document papers, so they couldn't get jobs. They were very, very poor. In fact, the Greek, they're called poor in this letter, but the Greek has two words for poor. One means poor, and the other means you ain't got a pot to piss in. And it's that latter word that is used about the Smyrnans. They just, they were destitute. They couldn't hold down jobs. You think about like undocumented workers in our own country who, if they don't have documents, they could easily be exploited by others. They might be able to eke out some marginal living, but it's going to be on this cash-only basis and under the table and so forth. And of course, a lot worse could happen than just you being destitute. You could actually be put in jail or or lose your life. And so you can imagine there was some tension then between the Christian Jewish community, which is reflected in that letter. The letter is not saying that Judaism is not legitimate, that it's saying, there are these people say they are Jews, but they're not true Jews. So he's acknowledging Judaism is legitimate, it's fine, but the people who are not true Jews in the words of the letter are those who have insisted that Christians are a separate group and are then subjecting them to this abuse. So no wonder that's what it means to say they're part of the synagogue of Satan. And in Revelation, when you hear mention of the beast or Satan, that's code language for the Roman Empire and the emperor. So what the real language is, not to say that they're completely separate. John seems to have believed in an evil power, principality, but really what he's saying is, these people are just simply the synagogue of the empire. That's what they are. That's what they are. They're not real Jews. They're empire-loving Jews. This You may wonder, what does this all mean for us today? What does this 2,000-year-old history have to say about 2024? Well, before we go any further, I'm going to invite you to, I've got a video by Anomaly Brennett, who is going to help us contemplate, like, who'd be the Smyrnians today? Who are the people who are part of that kind of imaginal cell community, but are being beset upon by those who say, you're not real Christians, or you're not real whatevers, right? Let's hear from Anomaly Brennett.
Here's to all the tough girls, and here's to all the sensitive boys. We belong, and here's to all the rejects, and here's to all the misfits. We belong. Here's to all the brains and the geeks, and here's to all the made-up freaks, yeah. We belong. And when the same old voices say that we'd be better off running away, we belong, we belong anyway. And here's to all the one-hit wonders, and here's to all the mistakes and the blunders. We belong. And here's to all the fashion don'ts, and here's to all the Friday night home alones. We belong. And when the same old voices say that we'd be better off running away, we belong, we belong anyway. Here's to all the outspoken minorities, and here's to those who chose diversity. We belong, we belong. And when the same old voices say that we'd be better off running away, we belong, we belong anyway.
Nomaly Brennett. Those of you who are longtime Darkwood Brew fans may recognize her voice. She is the one who created the Darkwood Brew theme song called Darkwood. Yeah, so I'm gonna open it up to our Zoom audience in a little bit here. I just want to kind of ask the question: where is the Church of Smyrna today? So have that on your mind if you're joining us on Zoom. But I just wanted to note that when I was growing up, I went to a United Church of Christ church just outside of Seattle. And one Sunday morning, I walked into the sanctuary, and in the sanctuary was this sign that read, "If a power hostile to Christianity arose and put you on trial for being a Christian, would they have enough evidence to convict you?" Curiously, nobody took credit for posting that sign. Yeah, if they put you on trial for being a Christian, would they have enough evidence to convict you? Well, it leads to the question, naturally, what is the evidence of being a Christian? Well, I think William Barclay, a biblical scholar of the last century, said it well when he observed that he says Jesus promised his disciples three things. One, that they would be completely fearless. Two, they would be absurdly happy. And three, they would be in constant trouble. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up the church in Smyrna. They were in constant trouble. They seem to have been fearless in holding to their faith, and they must have been absurdly happy because why would you even bother to put your life at risk to be part of this community if it wasn't giving you something pretty profound that nobody else was giving you? Absurdly happy, and the Spirit in this letter says, he's just is full of praise for these people. So you're really under the gun. I mean, and it's going to get worse, actually. He says it's going to get worse before it gets better, right? More of you are going to go to jail and so forth. So this is no prosperity gospel preaching here. This is like, you're following me, you're under the gun already, and it's going to get worse before it gets better, but you are desperately poor, but you are rich in my eyes, and you have a crown that awaits you that's far better than the crown you see on top of this hill in Smyrna that the Romans can give you. And in contrast to the other letters, most of the other letters, the Christ of this letter has no suggestions for how the Smyrnans can do better. It's like if you got a letter grade, the Smyrnans would get an A+ here. And I think it's for these three things: fearless, absurdly happy, and in constant trouble. So where are the Smyrna churches today? Well, I think that we have a clue in this kind of conflict between the two communities, the Christian community and this portion of the Jewish community that was excluding the Smyrnans. I think that really stands for a lot that's perpetual, like any religion, whether it be Judaism, whether it be Christianity, which is a lot of these days. Any religion where you have this doctrine and dogma about who's in and who's out. And you rigidly define that so that there are people in your community who may be faithful to Moses or faithful to Jesus, but you're saying, well, you're not real Jesus followers. You're the fake kind or whatever. And you make that just this rigid doctrine. That's where things start to head south. At least that's how things headed south in Smyrna. I remember when I helped co-lead a walk across the country back in 2006 with Crosswalk America. We were walking for 12 progressive, what we were calling at the time, progressive Christian values, and as articulated in the Phoenix Affirmations. And I'll never forget, for instance, meeting so many people in small rural towns of like the panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma and so forth, who were part of conservative churches in those towns, and yet had, for instance, a gay son or daughter or a relative or friend who was gay or were gay themselves, but they were completely in the closet about it, and they had more incentive than most people to be in the closet, because in a small town, if you raise your hand up saying, "Yeah, I support the LGBTQ community," you could not only be out on your on your rear end in these faith communities, ostracized from them, but you also, that's connected to your social life. So you're losing your social network, not just your faith network, and likely you're losing your economic network as well. So people were really zipping their lips if they had anything contrary to what the church was saying, not just about LGBTQ equality, but all kinds of things. They were just staying very, very quiet. But it cuts both ways. I mean, we actually found a similar dynamic in very, very liberal churches. I remember one in Champaign, Illinois, we'd reached out to for some assistance, and we actually got a letter back from a committee there turning us down as progressive Christians, walking for progressive Christian values. They turned us down because, in their words, we were not being critical enough of the evangelical Christians. And they literally reminded us that when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg door in Germany, just like we were trying to kind of effectively nail the 12 Phoenix affirmations to the door of America in Washington, D.C., that sparked the 30 Years' War. And we had the distinct impression that they were disappointed that we weren't out leading the fight, the cause for another war between, Christians. And so it happens both places. And, views over the years have changed, even in the evangelical world, about LGBTQ people, for instance. But I would imagine that it's still pretty hard if you're part of an evangelical Christian community to be, for instance, a climate activist, or work for Planned Parenthood, or, God forbid, be a Democrat. And in those more liberal communities, I mean, I would think it would be fairly uncomfortable if you were a strong fiscal conservative, or you were a pro-life activist, or, God forbid, you were a Republican. I mean, so this is not a bashing of one side or another. It's really this trait to define who's a true believer and who's the not so true believer. That's where we get into trouble. So where would we find the Smyrna churches today? Where are they? I mean, I know when I look back in the 1800s, I could find plenty of Smyrna churches. I mean, they were the ones who were on the forefront of the abolitionist movement. They were on the forefront of the women's suffrage movement. I mean, these people were taking hits all the time in big-time ways. They were going against the stream in society in big ways and suffered for it. When I look into the last century, I see plenty of Smyrna churches. They were the ones who were on the forefront, for instance, of the civil rights movement, and also eventually on the forefront of the LGBTQ equality movement. I remember myself, even in Scottsdale, Arizona, I mean, back in the mid-'90s, we declared ourselves open and affirming, and a bunch of clergy in our churches did the same thing, and suddenly we were getting these really, really scary letters, and ended up having to purchase a home security system, motion sensing lighting. We bought a Doberman to protect ourselves, not from thieves, but from fellow Christians who didn't think that we were the right kind, and they felt they could be quite threatening towards us. So, yeah, there were lots of Smyrna churches there. So the question is, what about 2024? That's what I want to do, is open up for a discussion tonight. If anybody out there in the Zoom world, if you want to unmute yourself, I invite you to chime in. Do you see, are there communities out there? They could be Christian or they could be other faiths. So let's just make this as inclusive as possible, who really are standing up for what they believe in, and hopefully in a generous spirit, but are increasingly you find themselves running upstream, or they're part of those imaginal cells, right? They've got the DNA for the new form within maybe their own faith, but they are they're getting some strong headwinds right now. If anybody wants to contribute, I'm happy to open this up. I think we've got some shy people tonight. That's okay. I'll just offer. Hey,
Dr. Elnes.
Hey, Keith. Good to see you. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Great stuff. So picking up on your use of the phrases of Christianity 1.0, 2.0, 3.0,
yeah,
and just for the sake of brevity, just assuming for a second that 3.0, would include, for instance, a pluralistic Christian outlook. Now, wouldn't it stand to reason that as we move from the 2.0 to 3.0 and maybe beyond at some point, that even the word Christian will at some point in time be viewed as a border around a certain group of people that is by definition excluding others. And so, whether it be, the example you gave of the progressive church not wanting more criticism of the evangelicals or whatever, just wondering if, that the word Christian, I'm thinking about the question you asked, like, would there be evidence to convict you? Could that at some point in time be something that, is viewed even in the extreme as restrictive or exclusionary? Thank you.
Yeah, good, a very good question and point, Keith. I mean, certainly, it doesn't take too much looking around to find that the word Christian has become so odious in the wider community, especially amongst we have the largest growing group within the country is the quote unquote spiritual but not religious, or the nuns, who check none when it comes to the surveys asking what part of the faith they're from. A lot of those people were Christians, actually, who then left Christianity as an organized religion, and that is a definite open question. Will there be such a thing as Christianity in the future? I'm guessing that there will always be Jesus followers, and so and my guess, and this is just me making maybe an informed guess, but my guess is that if Christianity is truly about love, or whatever religion is about love, love wants to be organized. And so as much as we don't like organized religion, love itself wants to be organized. It wants to clump like those imaginal cells with other cells, right? And so there's always going to be some sort of institutional form, I think, even of a very authentic and vibrant faith. You always have to be, careful of those institutions, though. There's that old Quaker expression that, institutions exist for the painless extinction of the ideas that originally gave them birth. And so you always have to be careful of institutional forms of religion. But I think that's why I'm intrigued by Christian pluralism. And I call myself a Christian pluralist. If you ask, Eric, what are you? I don't just simply say I'm Christian. I say I'm a Christian pluralist. Because I think what's made Christianity so odious actually is not the message of Jesus. Right? It's not the insistence to love your neighbor, love your enemy, those kind of things. It is the insistence that Christianity, this one particular belief system, is the only legitimate one on the planet, outside of which nobody has any hope of connecting with God, and you may just find yourself roasting in hell for all eternity. I think that's a very odious form of faith. I would actually call it demonic. It's a demonic form of faith, and whether you believe in demons or not, it's still demonic, in my opinion, to say that everybody else is going to be frying in it for all eternity. It's at least, at very minimum, it's Christian terrorism, spiritual terrorism. And so it's no wonder that the word Christian has become so odious amongst people. And that's where I just hope that if we actually are, those imaginal cells, if the new butterfly is that form of Christianity that actually recognizes that the path that Jesus was pointing to actually exists within other faith communions, and that actually this faith then is way bigger and more connected to other people than we ever imagined possible, that's a pretty cool thing. Hey, Donna, I see your hand is raised. Yeah, weigh in on this. Donna from Connecticut.
One of the things that I wanted to say, speaking for myself personally, I stopped calling myself a Christian many years ago because of it being co-opted to mean other things that I totally stood against. And I would often say, well, my Christianity is maybe more informed by Buddhism, and I can kind of go with that. And then I just stopped labeling any of it. I just have a certain belief. Lately, I've been speaking to, or have been around, I guess you'd call them the young millennials, people between about 28 and 32, 33. And most of them were raised in a Christian church, but left and have zero intention of ever participating again. But they're all about that message of Jesus. And they can be activists and informed and caring, and they're, very, very careful to try to language what they say so they're not offending anyone, so that they're inclusive, all of the things that you really would want to be. And yet they struggle to say, well, you know, in this of course, everyone, the message is it's a divided country and blah, blah, blah. And they feel like it doesn't have to be, because if you are a Republican, I don't hate you for that. If I know you and I know you're a loving person and blah, blah, blah. And they're really going through a lot of angst. And I'm very curious to see where that's going to end up.
Yeah.
Because I think that would have some impact on so-called future Christianity, what it's called, how it looks.
I totally agree with you, Donnie. You make a really good point that really we as elders, too, have a lot to learn from those millennials and also the Gen Z behind them as well, that they are kind of helping us tread into new waters. And who knows what the form will take. I think the main thing is to recognize that we are kind of in this goop phase. Like the caterpillar of Christianity 2.0 has melted down its goop. It's a lot of stinky goop right now. And there's these imaginal cells that are there seeking connection right now. So the key isn't like, what does the butterfly look like? You know, I mean, the imaginal cells don't know what the butterfly looks like. They just know it to be imaginal cells. And so we just kind of keep doing following where our hearts are calling us, where we, you know, or I would theologically put it where I think the Holy Spirit is calling us. But, and find those, and like you're saying, you know, where's the connectivity? It's in the love connections. It's always in those connections about love, whether you're from another faith or you're in part of no faith. How do we develop those loving connections and see where love takes us, right? Well, this is good. This is rich, and I'll just end with we're coming up to the end of our time tonight, so I just want to note that I actually have a T-shirt here in Florida where I am currently that says, "Live so that if your life were turned into a book, Florida would ban it." Live so that if your life were turned into a book, Florida would ban it. That's kind of funny, but also kind of unfair. Floridians, I know a lot of really cool Floridians who are reading those banned books. I really think, I think that if any of us read our Bibles and really tried to follow Jesus, they'd ban the Bible, they'd ban Christianity altogether. The T-shirt that I'd really like to have is one that says, "Live your life in such a way that you are completely fearless, absurdly happy, and in constant trouble." Constant trouble. That's, to me, the T-shirt I'd like to have. I haven't found one on the internet, so I guess short of owning this kind of T-shirt, I'm just going to have to try to live this kind of life. How about you? How do you want to be living your life in the coming weeks, months, and years? And will it have anything to do with being completely fearless, absurdly happy, and nevertheless in constant trouble? Well, it's great to be with you, troublemakers from around the country. Look forward to joining you next week as well as we continue our series, 7 Letters to 7 Churches. And now I'd like to end just simply by offering you, the listener, the watcher, a blessing that I offer my own congregation every week. Friends, may the Spirit, the Holy Spirit of the living God, made known to the world by many different names, but astonishingly similar mercies, and to those of us as Christians most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into places you may not necessarily go yourself, go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong and constant companion, and dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone on life's journey, and you are loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you and through you, now and always. Amen. We'll see you next week.